Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Even though Memorial Day was a month ago, but we always can give honor to those who risked and gave their lives for our country. Today, I want to speak about my good friend, he should rest in peace, Avram Yochum Getzel Freund, A.B. Freund. We've spoken about him a little bit before, but I want to speak about him more. But first, I have a leftover from last time. I had mentioned that there was a fellow named Alfred Weiner, a man in his 90s, that he was in the United States Japanese occupational force after World War II, and he was extremely meticulous about kashrut. And I had mentioned that he lived off of beer and beans for quite a long time, and even though he had certain aterim, certain permissions for certain situations from his rabbis, but number one, he just made up his mind he was going to be very careful about kashrut, and number two, it was after the war in the occupation in Japan, so he really didn't feel that he had to be so lenient. But I recently was in Providence, Rhode Island, and I saw his son Mordechai, and his son Mordechai informed me that his father, Zosai Gesund, lived that way for 2 years. I thought it was 6-7 months. It was 2 years. Could you imagine? 2 years, all he ate was beer and vegetables. That was it. That's unbelievable. I mean, I don't know if there are any health repercussions or anything like that, but I mean, there's a lot of discussion. I mean, I have the Chafetz Chaim over there today. You may have been wondering, why would all those army people, I have the sainted Chafetz Chaim on the end over there. The Chafetz Chaim has his connections to the army, and he has a lot of discussions in his Sefer Machne Yisrael, which he wrote for Russian and Polish Jewish troops, about kosher and when they don't have to eat kosher, and alternatives to the meat, and when you should eat meat and when you shouldn't. Speaks a lot about getting enough exercise to build up your strength. But this fellow Weiner, he made up his mind, I'm going to do it. And 2 years on beer and vegetables, because he just didn't want to compromise kashrut, whatever. I mean, there still was a certain amount of permissiveness, because the vegetables, they didn't exactly give him separate kosher pots, but he did what he can. So Avram Yochum Getzel Freund, again, he was a colonel. He told me that he was a chief medic, trained a lot of people to save lives. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. He was in France. He was all over the place. He also told me that he was involved in some reconnoitering, getting things ready for the next movement in the battle. And I mentioned in the past about him that before he left the East Side, his father, blessed memory, told him at some point, I mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again because I have something else I want to bring out about AB and kashrut. His father said, at some point you're going to have to eat treif. It's inevitable. You have to have up your strength, because as we all said last time, in battle, if you're lacking strength at all, if your reflexes aren't fast enough, either you're going to get yourself killed or somebody else is going to get killed. That his father said, Abe, I know when you eat meat, you love to suck the marrow. Do me a favor, do yourself a favor, do God a favor. Just eat the meat you need to live. You don't have to suck the marrow. You'll be able to fight the Nazis without sucking the marrow. And just because you're going to have to eat treif doesn't mean you should enjoy it. So go without sucking the marrow. And he was faithful to that. Kept his father on his mind. But I want to mention another thing about him. Now, Abe, as you may have heard, usually a soldier gets trained down south. You may go to Fort Bragg and places like that. Gil, where were you trained initially?
Benny, Fort Bragg.
Okay, it's the same area. So it seems to be in America, it was easy to get kosher. His parents could send him more packages. He told me the greatest thing, it was like Kevin, is at times when he was stationed near a chaplain, and he could get to a chaplain's house for Shabbos, he said that was Me'ein Olam Haba. That was absolute heaven. He had very, very fond memories. He couldn't do it all the time. But he said whenever a chaplain was available to have troops for Shabbos, he would go for Shabbos Yontiv in this country, and it would be absolutely wonderful. There'd be no question about the food, how he was keeping Shabbos Yontiv, get to hear Dvar Torah. And he told me he really, really cherished those chaplains that came through the area, various places he was stationed down there. But once he got into the war, certainly on the other side, by the Battle of the Bulge and those areas, so he knew getting kosher food was going to be very, very hard. And so he tried to figure out, I don't know, maybe the bread will be okay. You hear a lot of stories from military people that when there was nothing else, they ate the bread. I mean, the truth of the matter is, if you speak to older people, you are young, older people, they will tell you that there were times in American history, and I heard this from other countries also, there were times in American history where there were no kosher bakeries. There absolutely were no kosher bakeries, and rabbis permitted people then to go into a bakery, buy bread, not have it sliced because they didn't know what in the world was going on with the kalim and the vessels, and they would bring it home. And I met people even not so old that had the experience because there was a stopgap measure for that time. So in the military, certainly they ate a lot of bread, and Abe was hoping that he could do okay with the soup. But we all know soup, you never know what's inside soup. You hope it's just going to be vegetables. You know it's not exactly kosher, but you need some strength, you need some protein, some vitamin, this and that. So in the beginning, when Abe ate the soup, he really, really got nervous. And he really would ask himself, do I need this today? Do I not need this today? And then something wonderful happened. Now, Rabbi Berel Shlita has a saying, God has a sense of humor. He really, really does. And of course, we like to be careful what we say about God. I personally got in trouble. When I was in high school, I made a Purim tape. And this is what I said. Does anybody remember the TV show Happy Days with Richie? Maybe you saw the reruns of it. So the coolest guy on there was a Jewish guy. Remember his name? Henry Winkler? The Fonz. You remember the Fonz? You look exactly like him. Same jacket. So anyway, the Fonz was very, very big. He's still around. NCSY. I don't know if you remember this, David. NCSY gave out a button, and all the kids were wearing it. Somebody had arranged with Henry Winkler, who's a Jew. He's like this, and it says on there, it went all over the country, be cool, go to shul. And I remember all the NCSYs were wearing this. It was the biggest thing, and it had Henry Winkler like this with his it was a very, very, very big thing. So I had made a Purim tape, and it was at the time when Happy Days was a big thing, Richie Cunningham and all that. And on the Purim tape I said, Hashem is the best. He's even better than the Fonz. So my friends liked it. But we all know, whether you're in yeshiva, college, vocational school, there's always someone, now I don't know what word you're used to, think, monk, squeal, rat. I know when I mention it to my students, they say, which is the right word nowadays? So anyway, what did they tell me? They told me rat. So they told Rabbi Heinemann Shlita that Karp made a comedy tape. Now, Rabbi Heinemann has a sense of humor, but, he knows what's appropriate. And I had a relationship with him. Rabbi Heinemann pulls me over. I have to remember also, I don't know if you ever met Rabbi Heinemann or not. Rabbi Heinemann is a Yekka. He's a German Jew. Not exactly straight out of Berlin or Frankfurt, but he's a Lakewood kind. But anyway, he pulled me over very seriously and said, Tzvi, did you make a tape that compared Hashem to Fonzie? I don't even know if he knew who Fonzie was. This is a rabbi who knows everything, but I don't know if he knew that. I said, yes, Rabbi, I did that. Tzvi, that's inappropriate. Erase the tape. I didn't argue. All right. So I have to be careful about who you compare God to. So I have to be careful what we say. But Mr. Freund, he was in a situation. So I'm just talking about God has a sense of humor, but you have to be careful when you say God has a sense of humor. Rabbi Heinemann was trying to show me, watch your jokes, watch what you say. You're talking about God. So, but this God did have a sense of humor. A.B. was wondering, what can I do about the soup? I mean, should I go into the kitchen in the mess hall and sneak and peek and look at the chef and find out what they're putting in there, because every night it was different, right? In the military, if they serve you soup, you don't know what could be in there, right? Anything could be in there. In college, yeshiva, vocational, they don't do that to you. But in the military, if there's soup, you really never know what's in there. The Weisblum and the IDF isn't any different. You know it's kosher, but you really know what's in that soup? So this is what happened. Now I'm going to tell this very, very carefully, because we have the machine on it, and what's in a shul. Now you're all smart men. We have a saying in Hebrew, Hamevin Yavin. Hamevin Yavin. Weisblum, what's the best way to say that in English, that they'll get what I'm talking about?
Whoever understands.
Yeah, but I just got to add to that. There's a word in English, subliminal, that whoever understands, but there's an undercurrent, but you really got to understand. Read
between the lines.
Right. So A.B. told me like this with a smile. He says, Karp, let me tell you how I really got to keep kosher in the military. Hashem did me a favor. Now I'm going to tell you what happened. I'm going to make it clean. I'll rate a G, and you fill in the blanks yourself. And when you figure out what it is, you're probably going to laugh. A.B. told me, and this really shows God has a sense of humor. Now, a sergeant came over to A.B. one night after leave. Now, gentlemen, we know, especially if it's the Navy, that if there's military leave, not everybody behaves as well as Gil and Earl. Military leave is military leave. They've been cooped up, with a bunch of, who knows what they were in the barracks with, especially in the Navy. Sergeant comes back from leave. A big, tough guy comes into A.B., and he's almost in tears. A.B., you got to save me. You got to save me. So Ramo said, well, Sarge, what's wrong? A.B., I'm going to lose my rank. I'm going to get a dishonorable discharge. I'm in trouble. You got to save me. What happened? What's wrong? A.B., I just came off a leave, and I was here, and I was there, and I stayed up very late. And A.B., I got a real problem, and there's going to be what they call a short-arm inspection soon, and I'm going to get in a lot of trouble and use my rank. Guys, you get it yet? I had a really good time on this leave, but I'm in trouble. And Abe, you're a medic. I understand you got the shot. So Abe goes, oh, that. Yeah, I got the shot. But Abe said, I want to strike a deal. Now Abe was going on a risk because he's talking to the sergeant, You know how sergeants could be. Except for by Weisblum, I hear the female sergeants in the IDF are much tougher than the male.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, I only know this because one time I was touring my family at Quantico in Virginia, and I heard this fierce barking of a sergeant with the troops, and my wife and I took a good look. It was a lady sergeant, a terror. So I don't know what it's like in the Holy Land. Well, anyway, A.B. says, I want to strike a deal. Here's the deal. And A.B. knew he was going out on a limb. He said, Sarge, you need something from me, and I need something from you. And the Sarge says, Abe, anything. I gotta have the shot. I may need more than one. He goes, listen, I'm Jewish. And I like to eat this kosher. Listen, all I want you to do, I'll give you all the shots you need every night. Just tell me, is there meat in the soup or not? Because I really need vegetables. That's all I ask from you. Tell me every night if it's a vegetable soup or if they put in any meat. I gotta know. The Sarge said, that's it. Then I can keep kosher. I'll give you the shot. Abe, honest, whatever you want, I'll tell you. Now, Abe, could you please? Abe gave him the shots. He didn't contract what he thought he was going to contract. He kept his rank, honorable discharge, and he got to keep kosher for a long time. So if you have any question that God has a sense of humor and he does things strange ways, now don't have that question anymore. But Abe tried his best to keep kosher. He said he couldn't do it all the time. He also was very careful about tefillin. He took his tefillin with him throughout as many battles as he could. Unfortunately, there was one part where they were stationed in a building near the front. All of a sudden, there was a call, incoming, everybody get out of here. They ran out, and within 15 seconds, the entire building exploded with his tefillin. So I think he told me for 2-3 weeks he couldn't wear tefillin till he got hold of a chaplain that gave him new tefillin. And he was very, very broken about that. I was in battle. I didn't have that mitzvah. It's just nice to meet people like that. I was in battle. I needed my tefillin to protect me, but he just had to run out. If he would have waited those few extra minutes, I mean, a mitzvah protects us, but you can't. There's so many miracles in it you can ask for. Now, where does the Chofetz Chaim come in? Now, the Chofetz Chaim, he wrote a beautiful handbook for Jewish soldiers. He wrote it for Russian and Polish soldiers, but a lot of it would still apply. He himself never was in the military, but he was dedicated to the military. He founded an organization called Kosher Kessel. Now, would you like to guess? Kessel is German Yiddish. It sounds almost the same in English if you change one letter. Kessel would be a great big kettle called Kosher Kettle. That's what it was. And he organized Jews all over the place to send as many kosher meals as they could to the troops. Because the Russian and Polish army was not going to be very accommodating, and I don't think the Jewish Welfare Board had started yet. And of course, I'm sure you heard the Jewish Welfare Board, wonderful, wonderful organization. They save soldiers in many, many ways. Earl, you got a lot of packages from them, right? Wonderful, wonderful. So the Chofetz Chaim, that was his contribution to the military. But he speaks over here about soldiers keeping kosher, and he writes, what they can do, what they should do, what they should try to do. And he says, I want to tell you something, says the Chofetz Chaim. That man right over there with the big fluffy kippah. He said, whenever there's a picture of Menachem Begin, I always pull it out. It would be a lack of Kavod HaTorah if I didn't do the same for the Chofetz Chaim. Right? Give honor to everybody else. So we got to honor the Chofetz Chaim. So the Chofetz Chaim said like this. He says, you soldiers out there, if you are able to keep kosher in the times when you're able to, you are the true Gibor. This is true mightiness. Usually in military, you think of standard kind of strength and muscle and armaments, which is all important. But he says, I'm telling you, you are the ultimate mighty man if you can be in a situation where you're able to keep kosher, which he recognizes is not always possible. And the Chofetz Chaim says, I want you to know that people like this, that strive and find a way to keep kosher in the military, when they can, God is going to put a crown on the head of every single tzaddik, and he brings verses to back himself up, because these are just unbelievable, unbelievable people. And he mentions that anybody in the future in Olam Haba, anybody that dedicated themselves and persevered not to eat treif meat in this world will merit to see all kinds of wonderful things in Olam Haba. And he says, if your co-patriots make fun of you when you're trying to be dedicated to this mitzvah, then you're going to get rewarded even more. And then the Chofetz Chaim, who the entire Jewish world recognizes as a saint, pardon the expression, he ends off his big essay on trying to keep kosher in the military. And again, he says again and again, there's going to be times when you can't. And he says, know your halachas. Speak to your rabbi before. Rabbi, if they offer me X, Y, Z, which is the least bad one? What should I take? This kind of meat, that kind of meat, this kind of soup, that kind of soup. No, although there's so many Gemaras where the Gemara will ask, well, if I eat this, how many sins do I get? To eat that, how many more? And a lot of times you learn those Gemaras, you say, who cares? Who cares? The Chavetz Chaim says the military man cares, because he's allowed to eat when he needs to, but he needs to know when he's out in the field, well, what's more kosher, what's less kosher. It's like on Passover. If somebody's sick, they can take chametz stick of medicine, but you still want to know which one is a lesser degree of chametz. So the Chavetz Chaim ends off this topic and he says, such a soldier that is able to keep kosher at some level in the military, he says, I wish I could have their portion in Olam Haba. That's a big statement. The great holy Chavetz Chaim, he's mostly known for teaching us not to speak Lashon Hara, but he taught a lot of things. But he says, I wish I could have the portion in heaven that those military men had. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And Abi really tried his best. He had a lot of close calls. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I want to mention it again quickly. Abi really, no, I don't think I mentioned it. Abi really shouldn't have made it back. What happened was as follows. If you Google, now if I got the name right, if you Google Malmedy was a horrible, horrible thing. From the books that I read, it seems to say like this. For the first part of the war, G.I. Joe, G.I. Earl, G.I. Gil, G.I. Rabbi, whoever you want, they tried to be somewhat decent. They tried to treat the other guy with some level of decency. But then, there were certain parts of the war where the Japanese did this and the Germans did that, where G.I. Joe said, you know what, no more than this nice guy. So if you read up on Malmedy, I think that was the battle that he told me about, that he was saved from. The Germans did such atrocities to our troops that after that, a lot of our troops said, you know what, from now on, you're going to play like that, we're going to play like that too. We're not going to extend ourselves. It was a horrible, horrible thing. The Germans did a lot of things they didn't have to do, and they mutilated people. Absolutely horrible. From what I understood from Abi, he was supposed to be killed there. This is what happened. Shortly before the troops were subdued and ruined in Malmedy, there was a guy who got wounded terribly. And the commanding officer said, listen, this guy's not going to make it. The medic with his sulfur powder and his bandages and his shots of morphine, it's not going to do it. You got to get him to a mass unit. I need a volunteer. So everybody figured, volunteer? He's going to drive a Jeep or a military ambulance over here? You don't have a chance. You're going to get your head blown off. Nobody wanted to volunteer. The commanding officer couldn't command anybody to do it. Abi said, I'll do it. His friends said, Abi, you're going to get killed. Stay with us. Yeah, you're giving away your life for his life. He says, I'm doing it. Abi got the guy to the mass unit. As he headed back, he found out his entire unit had been captured, most of them killed. So it turned out, and I heard this from the man himself and from his daughter. So it turned out, because he made up his mind, I'm going to risk my life. And this is not what you would call in Hebrew a suffix. Suffix means a doubt, the chance of risking your life. It was more like over here. But he made up his mind he was going to do it for someone else. That mitzvah saved his life. And it's frightening, you hear a lot of these stories by 9/11 also, people who had like a last minute mitzvah and they were supposed to be in the Twin Towers. I mean, who understands what's going on over there? You hear stories, people, they missed the regular minyan, they went to another minyan, they caught slichas. Guys from Muncie that he was supposed to be at work a certain time. Someone said, can you give me a ride to Brooklyn? And the guy's thinking, I'm going to give you a ride to Brooklyn, I'm going to be late. And he did it. And when after he dropped him off, turned on the radio, Twin Towers. So sometimes you have things that happen that, like, right when it happens, you say, oh my God, that mitzvah saved my life. Sometimes it's not clear, sometimes it's clear. But Abi saw, had I not driven that guy to the MASH hospital, that would have been the end. So that was Abi, and thank God he lived through it. But he really was exemplary in the mitzvah of the Torah called Lo Samod Al Dam Re'echa. You all know this mitzvah. Don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. So the Sefer Chinuch explains over there that it's a mitzvah to save lives, especially of your brethren. And he says if a person has any ability to save another life, that's called not standing by the blood of your neighbor. And the Gemara's expression is, how do you know that if you see your friend drowning or an animal schlepping them, a robber, dangerous robber is coming, that you need to save their life? And it quotes this verse, Lo samad al dam re'echa, don't stand idly by the blood of your friend, and you should be willing to spend money to do almost anything for it. And the Sefer Chinuch says, let me tell you why this is such a great mitzvah, to try to save others. He said, listen, you should save others as you want others to save you. And you are helping God keep the world going. You're a partner with God. When you save one of His children, as you would want to have them save you, you're keeping the world settled. And God wants planet Earth to be settled, because that's what it's all about, and you are God's partner in that. So AB was absolutely exemplary with this. There's a lot of talk in the Shulchan Aruch. If you look in Shulchan Aruch, the Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, he holds that not only is it a mitzvah to save others, if there's a chance that you're in danger, he says you're still obligated to push yourself. Now, a lot of rabbis argue with him. He's based on the Jerusalem Talmud. But he says not only you see somebody drowning and you're a good swimmer, you can jump in and save them at very little risk to yourself. So everybody says you should do that, or throw them a ring. The Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo says, well, even if there's a decent level of risk to yourself, he says you're still obligated to try. A lot of other rabbis bring proofs. The Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, doesn't hold like that, that if there's some real risk to you, even a doubt, you have no obligation. It's your own choice to do, what you choose to do. Now, I want to share with you now, AB did not tell me specifics about saving people. But I want to tell you a rule he corrected me on, and then I want to share with you something from Hyman Epstein. There's a lot of good things in there. I was giving a class one time about triage, the laws of triage. Believe it or not, there are halacha books that discuss when you have several wounded people, who do you treat first? Now, the great Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who we lost a few years ago, from the greatest halacha authorities in Jerusalem, a lot of things we do depend on him. Very, very great man. He was the Israeli equivalent of Rabbi Feinstein, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So he was asking a lot of medical questions, and I was reading in one book where a certain medic had said that he liked to treat bullet wounds second or third. Why? Because he found, dealing with the wounded, that sometimes when a hot bullet comes in, it sealed itself. It actually sealed itself. So this particular medic found, he goes, well, I'm going to treat, these other guys with the leg falling off. I'm going to do them first, or I'll do a shrapnel wound first, and a bullet wound I'll do second or third, because he said he found a lot of them, they closed themselves, heat sealed. So I was dumb enough to go over to AB. And I knew AB had saved lives all over the place. He did this mitzvah. And I said, AB, what was your rule about who went first with the triage? And then I was also foolish enough to ask him, I had read in another medic's account that he had a certain way to approach the wounded. Because if you don't approach the right way, you're going to get killed. And this was even more serious when you fought the Japanese. All the military books you look in. Now thank God, Gil, you didn't have to deal with this. But all the military books you look in, they tell you when the Japanese would shoot somebody, they wouldn't finish them off. Once they got them down, they would wait, because the medic would come out, and even though according to the Geneva Convention, a medic's not supposed to carry arms, and you're not supposed to shoot a medic, but we know that even though the Nazis most of the time, as rotten as they were, followed the Geneva Convention, the Japanese, forget about it. But it was known, the troops figured out early on that you got to watch it. They're going to hit a guy once, and when that medic goes out there, if he goes out there, and the commanding officer had to think, oh, if I'm going to send the medic out there, very, very often the Japs would wait for the medic to come out, kill the medic, then finish off the guy. And this guy Epstein, I'm going to tell you about. AB didn't fight the Japanese, he fought the Nazis. So I was foolish enough, and he really could have yelled at me, but he didn't. It was one of those, sonny boy, whippersnapper. I said, Uncle AB, and I used to daven next to him in Baltimore. I said, what was your rule about approaching the wounded? I read about a guy who would go like this and go like that to avoid fire. And what was your approach? What was your technique? And who did you treat first? So he shook his head with a small smile, which said a lot. He was a nice person, so he didn't say, you dumb kid born in the 60s, you don't know anything. Vietnam era kid, you don't know anything. He didn't say that. His face said it a little bit. He said, son, let me explain something to you. When you're in the middle of a battle and shells are coming in and things are exploding, there's no time to pull out your cell phone and call the rabbi. Hello, rabbi, there's a Nazi shell coming for me and I have 7 dead wounded. What should I do? He says, here's the rule. You want to know the halacha? When I was there, said AB, there were no rules for how to walk over to the wounded. There were no rules about who to treat first. Because he said, Karp, I had buddies blowing into pieces all around me. There's only one halacha in your head. Get over there, save life, save life, save life. Forget about yourself, and that's all you do. Hatzalat nefashot. He says, Tzvi, that was my rule. Just save life at all costs. He goes, there is no time to think. He goes, that's the halacha. And that's what it was. And his daughter, Shiur, blessed memory, told me that I was lucky he was willing to talk at all, because she said there were days when the memories of what happened to his buddies would haunt him, and he could not talk. He could not talk. He just couldn't. I mean, he's supposed to have seen things. You can imagine, but you don't want to imagine. So his daughter told me, when my father talks, get out what you can. Eventually, we're going to talk here about Glen Carr's rabbi, Rabbi Emanuel Polikoff, who was a chaplain involved in liberation of camps. You have all certainly seen this picture. That's Rabbi Polikoff. He is leading a minyan in Goebel's castle. That's Rabbi Polikoff. That's the Rabbi Glen Carr your friend grew up with. Rabbi Polikoff, he should rest in peace, was a very, very tough man. He died about 1.5 years ago. Did you know him, Rabbi Weisblum? Okay, long time Baltimore rabbi, but he was over there. Very, very tough fellow. His children told me they couldn't get him to talk about his experiences, and he was a chaplain. He wasn't a medic, he was a chaplain. And I'm telling you, if you met him, he was one tough rabbi. But his children and grandchildren said he'll hardly speak about anything. He didn't write it down. He just couldn't talk about it. It was too much. So, but AB saved a lot of lives. And I want to share with you, before you go, the account of Jaime Epstein. Now, I like Jaime Epstein, not only because of his dedication to our country and our people, I just picture some of Abe in Jaime Epstein. Now, Jaime Epstein was a Yiddilah. He was a medic from Omaha, Nebraska, and he was fighting in the Japanese theater. Now, everyone in the company loved him. Now, one asset he had is Jaime Epstein was a little fellow. If you're going to be a medic, it's good to be a little fellow, because there's less to shoot at, So this is what happened. A whole bunch of United States troops were hunkered down in water-filled mud holes. And in the last 12 hours of Jaime's life, this is told over by Major Bert Zief, the troops were cut off from getting rations. You have to picture a bunch of troops. They're in the mud. They're bending down. They can't get up more than a few inches, or they'll get their head shot off. and they're short of rations, and other troops are trying to get it to them, and they're already with dead men lying in the trenches. Now, remember, a medic by Geneva Convention is not allowed to carry any weapons. He is defenseless. He cannot shoot back. This book here, which is written by two veterans from World War I, J. George Fredman and Louis A. Falk, they said that the casualties among the medics have been higher than anybody else because of the way the Japanese had their rules over there about waiting for him. Now, the reason why the soldiers couldn't move at all, because the Japanese had plotted where all our holes were, and they set up two converging lanes of machine gun fire. So we were just stuck there, waiting for rations, and anywhere you moved, they tightened, and they were tightening it and tightening and tightening it in as they zeroed in on where we were, and they had snipers all over the place. And they kept adding more snipers that if one soldier tried to move, they were going to get him. But they couldn't go on like this, because they knew that once it would get dark, they were going to completely let all heck break loose. Well, Epstein heard a guy 8 feet ahead got shot in the neck by a machine gun. The commanding officer was not telling anybody to do anything because it was a suicide mission. And they even saw the guy got hit in the neck. So the Japs had figured out exactly where they were. And to send a medic out there was throwing one life after another. Like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, my chazis, the damadi dach sumik mi damadi day. How do you know whose blood is sweeter? Epstein started crawling through the mud towards the man with the bleeding neck. And he had the sulfanilamide powder and bandages with him. And he's crawling on his back. He can't lift himself up because then the Japanese are going to get him. He's crawling on his back, and laying on his back, he bandaged the guy. Now just one note. I'm friends with a chemist, a big chemist for the government, Dr. Shlomo Langerman, and he told me something. You may hear in the news, sulfur drugs, oh my God, sulfur drugs, this, that, side effects. Sal explained to me, actually I spoke to two people, Dr. Tzvi Blechman and Dr. Shlomo Langerman. They told me in the 40s, that was the antibiotic there was, like it or not. That was all they could give you. So if you had sulfur powder, they gave you whatever they could and it kept you alive, regardless of whatever findings. They also stressed, even if you knew there were side effects, if it was die or live with side effects, you're going to get the sulfur drugs. And that's the only thing that kept thousands of troops alive on all sides. So he crawled out, Jaime Epstein crawled out, Jaime Epstein crawled back. Made it one time, nobody could believe it. And remember, he crawled out on his back and did the procedure laying back because you couldn't come up even an inch, even though Jaime was a small guy. It got darker and darker, the Japanese intensive fire, and our soldiers were even more afraid to make a move because you couldn't see where you're going. Guy gets hit in the head. Jaime Epstein doesn't think. The little Jewish kid from Omaha crawls out again. And he gets out there, and he had to roll over to position himself. And again he did it. The Japs saw. They poured fire all over him, but miraculously, a second time, little Jaime Epstein, the Jewish medic from Omaha, made it back. All night, the Americans hugged the mud as low as possible, because systematically, the Japanese kept doing the math and geometry, zeroing in exactly where the troops were. They wanted to get everybody. And you could hear the troops whispering, hey, you see the Jewish kid? Epstein? Look at that guy! Amazing! He's saving everybody! And all from all the trenches, the words go, you see Epstein? Epstein, what a guy! Oh, that Jewish kid, he's at it. Well, then it was dawn. And by now, the Japanese math was better than ever. You may remember from school, the Japanese kids are always better at math. And then with machine guns, they were unbelievable. So now the fire was more accurate than ever. Man to the left was hit, and word came a medic was needed. Epstein went again, and Epstein saved the guy again, crawled out on the back, bandaged the guy, and the people were saying, "Amy, quick, find me back now." He waited a few seconds too long. He saved the guy, and Jaime Epstein got killed. And they said eventually, when things loosened up somehow, and they pulled back into the forest, the guy he saved, which was a huge, strong guy, was crying like a baby. Somebody's got to save Jaime. He saved everybody. Someone's got to save him. But Jaime gave up his life, and he was remembered with tremendous love by everybody in that troop over there. So this just gives a taste. I mean, you can't... You remember who Eric Sevareid was? You remember Eric Sevareid? All right, so if you're not old enough to remember who Eric Sevareid was, Eric Sevareid was a war correspondent of World War II for CBS. Eric Sevareid wrote as follows. He says, "You know, I was there, and I was in uniform, and I was a reporter. I was all over the place. People think I understand what the troops went through. I was there, and I don't have a clue." And he said, the sad thing is, these soldiers give everything for the country, and they come back. And he said something very, very powerful. He said, the husband's not the same husband, the father's not the same father, because nobody, he goes, not even me, and I was there in the trench with them, unless you were actually there doing what they're doing, you don't understand. You're a changed person. Like Gil tells me many times, our troops gave more for our country than anyone will ever know. And Eric Sevareid stressed, he says, you know, people come to me and they think I'm a reporter that I really, really understand. He goes, I'm telling you, I was there, but I didn't hold the gun. Nobody really shot at me. He says, if these men are changed people, you just have to understand. You just have to understand. But you'll never understand. You'll never understand. It may look like he said, it may look like your father, but it's not the same person. So you got to really appreciate these people. So I want to end with a statement from Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And maybe this is the kind of Torah that motivated Abi and Jaime Epstein to give their all to save their fellow troops. Says Rabbi Hirsch, if you ever get a chance to prove yourself a blessing, let me say it clearly. If you anytime get to prove yourself a blessing through the rescue of the life, property, and happiness of your neighbor, you will yourself go on living immortally in that rescue and in all the good which your neighbor is destined to effect with what has been saved for him. So you save a life, you have a mitzvah, and everything that person does, even if you leave the world like Jaime did. But here's Rabbi Hirsch says something very, very powerful. And when you're saving someone else's life and you're making an eternal contribution, do not put too fine a point on the question whether your brother or sister you're saving has deserved this of you. Even if you're saving your enemy, even if you're saving someone who has made your life miserable, rush to their aid, rescue their life, property, and happiness. This is the true teaching of Jewish love. And Abe, Olav Shalom, and Jaime, and all the other men and women that gave for our country, they lived up to Rabbi Hirsch. So thank you very much for listening. We look forward to the next time to speak about Rabbi Irving Tepper, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who gave his life for Minyan.
Let's go.